Today we are at this edition of Your Freedom Hub, presenting the free market cash patient world. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We are being sponsored by YourFreedomHub.com, where all the health disruptors and activists tend to congregate. We're going to have some pretty exciting commentary tonight, but before we do, let's just remind everybody that this is an ongoing series. You can register if you're not already getting weekly reminders by going to this top web address here, yourfreedomhub.com/cashpatient. And then independently, these are all recorded. There's a nice archive I'll show here in a minute, and these are the case-sensitive addresses that you'll go to, depending whichever one is your favorite platform. Just as a heads up, the Brighteon one has the oldest list of videos because it's the one we used the longest. Let me just show you for a quick second here before we jump in for today. Here's your Freedom Hub. Also, here's the archive. So this is the BitChute one, and you'll notice it goes back quite a ways, and there's an awful lot of great stuff you're going to want to see. Hey, look at this smiling mug over here. We got Dr. Arshad on here. And then also on Brighteon. So you'll see there's a whole similar set, but this one goes much further back. So there's a lot more to watch here for sure. So, but for today, let's find out what's in store for us. So I'm going to have Charles kind of do the honors here and explain who our guest is.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome, Dr. Davis. We met Tom through our colleague, Jeff Ellington, when we were ramping up the WOW Cash Appointments app, which Jeff and my Forbes featured plan was embedded in because we create cash patients, and that is what this is all about. And Dr. Davis, getting more integrated with what we are doing, set this up tonight for the post-COVID world. And it's not like cash wasn't going to be important for doctors without the crisis, but there is a new normal, and we conclude that cash is king and is critical for the doctors to rise out of this crisis better than before. And it's not going to be so insurmountable to accept cash as the new revenue source because, as Tom will discuss, there are other markets reliant on cash, and they have lessons to teach us on how we can fix this health monstrosity that we are all trying to survive in with a better supply and demand curve based on cash. Tom is a doctor in Missouri, and we are excited to hear what Tom has to say, Jeff.
Very, very good. Okay, Tom, I'm going to switch the screen over for you to take control of. Good.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a privilege to be here tonight. We're going to be talking about practical strategies in implementing cash pay healthcare revenue streams for clinicians. And even though this is targeted to clinicians, all you agents and brokers out there can certainly benefit from understanding what it is that your clinicians are going through. And also, I believe you'll pick up one or two business ideas going forward about how you can benefit from the new normal as well. First, of course, my disclaimer, the information presented is for informational purposes only. It is not professional, medical, legal, or insurance coverage advice. Such advice should only come from a licensed professional. You should consult a professional before taking any action. Now that the attorneys are happy, we all remember Fukushima, right? Fukushima is a prefecture in northern Japan. There's a nuclear power plant right on the coast, and in 2011, an earthquake registering 9.3 on the Richter scale hit nearby, and the resulting tsunami inundated the nuclear power plant, causing a meltdown, and we're still dealing with the catastrophic consequences. And in Japan, they have drones on station to do visual surveillance of their power plants, and this is Fukushima before the earthquake. And this is a photo of Fukushima after the earthquake, but before the tsunami hit. It took about a half hour for the tsunami to come in. And they look pretty similar. In fact, if you put them side to side, they look almost exactly the same. This is before the earthquake, this is after the earthquake, and before the tsunami. And it's not unusual, it's not surprising that they look similar, because the engineers knew what they were doing. This particular, the picture on the bottom really doesn't show much damage. The engineers engineered it for a 9.0 earthquake and a 90-foot tsunami that such an earthquake was predicted to generate. And yet, when the wave hit, this was the result. Why? Well, you can't really see it. Again, this is the picture before or after the earthquake, but before the tsunami. And again, you can't really see it, but this whole land here, because of the earthquake, dropped in elevation by 30 feet. And the seawall and the other productive structures down here had their foundation completely eliminated because of that earthquake. So when the 90-foot tsunami hit the 60-foot wall, this was the result. And again, it should be fairly obvious what I'm going for here. This very, very modern nuclear power plant is the American healthcare system. And COVID-19 was the earthquake. And although the foundation wasn't in very good shape before the earthquake, after the earthquake, it's non-existent. So when the tsunami of secondary effects hit, the demand destruction, the financial dislocation, the workforce disruption, when they hit, this is where we're going to be selling our healthcare services into. And this illustrates the point that that is probably the most important thing that you can take away from tonight's conversation. And that is, it is indeed a new world. Everything has changed. The reason of your waking mind may argue against that. You may look around and say, well, it doesn't really look that different, but it is. And the stressors that are coming are going to reveal that. Now, the people that own this power plant after the earthquake went around saying, hey, everything's fine, nothing's changed. It's just going to be okay. And the stakeholders in our healthcare system are saying that as well. You know, this is just a dip. It's going to be a V-shaped recovery. We're going to learn our lessons, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason that they're gaslighting like that is because they have a financial interest in doing so. They also want to put people like you and I off our game and try to prevent us, or at least delay us from taking the steps that we know we need to take in order to thrive in the new normal. Because they know that with their structures and their hidebound systems, that they're not going to thrive in the new normal. They probably don't even have a paradigm to survive in the new normal since they're so backward looking. So what they're trying to do is prevent us from moving. And the reason that they're doing that is that the people that move first, the people that are most facile, those are the ones that are going to get the greatest benefit, help the most people, and be able to go forward with the most autonomy. So it's in their interest to keep us from moving forward. And the lesson here today is that the world has changed, and those who move first do the best. Now, my name is Tom Davis. I'm a board-certified family physician. I came out of residency in 1994 into a very small single specialty group in rural Missouri. And about the same time, my partners were foresighted enough to sign the first total risk Medicare Advantage contract ever offered anywhere in the United States. And the reason our teeny tiny little practice got that opportunity is because every other practice who was bigger than us turned it down. Keep in mind, this is before anybody had heard about value-based healthcare. Nobody knew what to do with this total risk contract. Well, my partners and I, we evaluated it thoroughly. Learned some valuable lessons, and 18 years later, we sold the health system that we created to a regional competitor for $132 million. We had a hospital, a surgery center, cancer center, a linear accelerator, diagnostic centers, a multi-specialty presence in 18 different locations. And along the way, helping develop this and being in the leadership, I got to wear a lot of different hats. I was a clinician. I also was a leader of the organization. I was responsible for the healthcare of over 1,000 employees. We had to develop our own self-insurance plan. We also had to develop and offer our own insurance plan into our communities. And we developed our own Medicare Advantage plan as well. So I've had a seat at every side of the table. And I'm here to tell you that where Medicare Advantage was back in 1995, consumer-driven or cash-pay healthcare is in 2020. And much of my success can be ascribed to the fact that I was an early adopter, a first mover through fortune or design. And I am looking to pay that good fortune forward to the clinicians that follow me by sharing this type of opportunity with them, because they don't come along very often, but when they do, they can be very, very powerful. Now, we all know how the current payment system works, right? Services are provided to the patient by a provider. The provider bills the responsible party, who's usually not the patient. And then the payer pays the provider a pre-negotiated fee. And we also know the drawbacks of that system, right? It's very expensive. It's 30 cents on the dollar to collect what you're owed. These insurers, they're businesses too, and they have a business plan. 2/3 of the claims that are presented are paid immediately. They drag their feet on the next one quarter, and the remainder, they don't pay unless they don't have any other choice. It's a very expensive system for us to sell our healthcare labor into. It's also burdensome. We all know the hoops we have to jump through in order to even submit our claims. It's very rigid. The insurers only want us to provide services as they define it from 30,000 feet. They throw in some metrics that we get bonuses if we meet, but that's really just to increase the opacity of the system. Really, there's a defined amount of defined tasks that they're willing to pay us for. And if we provide services outside those definitions, well, it's fine with them, but they're not going to pay for it. And in a lot of cases, the contracts even restrict us from having the patient pay for it. So it's a very, very rigid system. And because it's rigid, it's also valueless, meaning that what we get paid by the patient as a result of our encounter has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of value that we generate during that transaction. That basically is determined by how little our health systems or the insurers can get away with paying us. The entire system that determines what our payment rates are is so swampy and so corrupt and stinks so badly that it really beggars the imagination. The payoffs, the kickbacks, the back scratching is just horrific. And yet this is the system into which we as clinicians choose to sell our hard-won skills. And it's not going to get any better. We all know that the regulatory requirements always increase. There's been a little respite during the current administration, but the arrow always points in one direction. As a result of COVID, the market consolidation for healthcare delivery is going to be something to see. The financial stress unleashed by the tsunami is going to result in the strong acquiring the weak, and the number of folks competing for our labor as clinicians is going to drop precipitously. So less competition obviously means less pressure and compensation. Fewer people looking to employ us or to pay us also will lead to more collusion. I have no idea what a world where there'll be even more collusion to hold compensation down than there is now will look like. I'm kind of scared of that, to be honest with you. But it almost certainly is going to accelerate that phenomenon. And finally, it's going to reach the point where you may not even be able to participate in a third-party payment system at all without paying somebody a kickback. And again, the first time somebody approaches you for a pay-to-play situation, it's very humbling. It really gives you a sense of what your true worth is. The biggest change going forward in our current payment system that's going to keep us from realizing our true value, though, is the fact that the buyers in that system are not purchasing what we as clinicians think that we're selling. We think that we're selling our expertise, but what they're actually interested in buying from us is our credibility. They want our name on the network lists so people will purchase their products or come to their health system. And once they get us, once we get along with the patient, they want us to use our credibility to extract information from that patient, information that they'd be unwilling to share in any other venue, and then put it in the electronic health record where it can be resold, either bundled and blinded, which is perfectly legal, or unbundled and unblinded, which is incredibly illegal, but highly lucrative and really goes on all the time. And that mismatch between what we think we're selling and what we're actually selling leads to a lot of the burnout and pathology in the workforce today. And it is a clear sign that our current payment system is making the workforce sick. So if the current payment system is making you sick, you're an intelligent person, you find another one. And that is our cash pay market. And the cash pay market, fortunately, has a number of things that demonstrate that it is a viable option. It is vast. There's $400 billion of out-of-pocket healthcare expenses paid out every year. That's more than enough to keep every clinician happy. It's also very lightly regulated. Most states treat the cash purchase of healthcare services as a private transaction. They don't even tax it as a service. A few states regulate subscription-based pricing, and a few others regulate guarantees that you can get for the service. But mostly it's very lightly regulated. But most important, it allows you as a clinician to unleash your value. You have knowledge of your local market and its idiosyncrasies that the insurance agent, that the insurance companies, and even your employers at the 30,000 foot level do not have. You also have knowledge of your strengths. So you can match your strengths to what your market wants and then price that accordingly using a cash pay system and really unleash a lot of previously corked up value that your training and your credentials allow you to generate. It really is tremendously powerful. And before COVID, most doctors kind of took the deal that, I'll accept a nice payment on a regular basis, and in exchange, I'll pretty much do what you want. And most doctors took that deal. After COVID, where the payment's not quite as munificent and not quite as regular, we as clinicians cannot afford to ignore this enormous value that we have simply by being at the ground floor, at the ground level. And the cash pay market allows you to take advantage of that. So what does that market look like? Well, it's a spectrum. I mean, we're all familiar with the nice individual that comes to our front desk every once in a while and pays cash for your service. And it's such a teeny tiny slice of your revenue, but conceptually it's very nice when it happens. And so we're familiar with that. We're just unsure about how to scale that. Next, you have local contracts with local purchasers of healthcare. 10 years ago, I would go to a local business and say, "Hey, I know that you're spending hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars on covering your employees' health expenses. And I also know that the insurer that sells you that coverage and the health systems that they contract with don't necessarily have interests that are aligned with you. In fact, they see you as the bag holder. They're going to do what they need to do to generate a profit, and they know at the end of the day, you're going to pay the price through higher premiums and more dissatisfied employees. So why don't you let me, for X dollars PMPM, provide primary care services for your employees, or urgent care services, or orthopedics, or dermatology, or in one case, rheumatology. Let me do that, and we will take great care of your employees, but we will also never forget who's paying us, and you will have an agent on the ground to help control those costs, but in a way that's ethical and reasonable." And that pitch was very hard 10 years ago. I made it, and I was successful, but it was a challenge. Now, post-COVID, when there's even more costs and expense stress on these businesses, and there's even a greater comprehension that the insurers and the health systems are not looking out for their interests, this is an easier sell. And as you agents and brokers out there, this is a great example of something that was kind of abstract and an abstract idea 6 months ago, but now is something that you absolutely have to move on, because you have the knowledge whom among your clients might be open to these relationships and which clinicians in your community might be open to these relationships. You can bring the two together in classic broker fashion, make a market, and make a commission out of that. 6 months ago, this would have been intellectually interesting. Yeah, I'll consider it. Now, this is one of the things that you have to move into, and you have to move in quickly, because you recognize that it's a brave new world, and both the clinician and the business are looking for you to help them. And this is a great example of how the new world has created new opportunities for you. So if you're a broker or an agent, start thinking about these relationships, because they can be very powerful and really create another revenue stream for you outside of the insurance system. Next point on the spectrum is really national marketplaces, and a great example of this is Wow.Healthcare. These are platforms where you can post your prices, usually with minimal restrictions, no contracting, no fees. You just put yourself out there for the cash pay payer that happens to be looking for your services, and let them come to you. Now, I'm certain that there are a number of marketplaces like this in development. Clearly, Wow, for whom I am affiliated with, is the best. But these marketplaces will allow you to take your brand, your expertise, your strengths that you have created your service lines to serve, and put them out to a much broader market, both national and international. The last year that I was in private practice, 10% of my patients came from 500 miles or more to see me. Usually the model there was they would see me once a year, and then I would take care of them over the phone periodically for when they needed. And that included people in 6 different countries. And a lot of them were former patients, former local patients that moved away, but at least a quarter of them were word of mouth that heard about me from them. And it is amazing the power of reputation and branding with no marketing at all. So you get a national marketplace like this, it is a tremendous opportunity for you to take what you've developed, your individual strengths that are tailored to your local market, and then put it out there. Because as special and as unique as your local market is, there's probably a lot of local markets out there that are similar, and these national marketplaces will allow you to reach them. The connectivity of the internet is underrated. Our brains cannot wrap around the network effect, but when it hits, it is astonishing in its power. So people pay me to help them develop cash-based service lines in their own practice. And when faced with the idea of going cash pay and seeing what the market looks like, they ask me, how do I get started? What's the next step? And I'm going to share with you what I share with them, but I'm not going to charge you my $5,000 fee for doing so. And that is dip your toe in. Do something. Don't allow the universe of cash pay revenue stream options to intimidate you into paralysis by analysis. Pick a service line, put a couple of tear sheets in your lobby, put up a coupon, call your local news aggregator, go to the local businesses and put up some tear sheets there. Just do something. School physicals for homeschoolers, or a gout clinic. Just do any one thing. Just do it. And understand that even Steve Jobs had to sell his first computer. This is a surprisingly big barrier to clinicians, small groups, individual clinicians who approach me about this. They just don't know where to start, and they're intimidated into inaction. You can't afford to do that now. Not in the brave new world we're moving into and the power of the first mover effect. So let's say that you do that. You tip your toe in and you decide that cash pay is for you. What do? Well, you start systemizing your approach to broadening your cash-based revenue streams. And the first thing you do is that you pick a service line that you're interested in and that plays to your strengths. Now, some folks would say that what you need to do is hire a marketing analyst to look at your market and see what people want to buy and then give that to them. Well, that is one way of doing it. It's also expensive. And experience teaches it's not nearly as efficacious as the trial and error way that this system uses. Again, trial and error gets a bad rap sometimes, but really it's not just how much revenue you generate, it's also how much effort you put into generating that revenue. And I submit that for these types of services where it's you personally that are going to have to be delivering it over and over and over again, the foundation of that service line is it's something that you enjoy and that it's a strength and something you're interested in developing. Because if it's not, then the longevity is just not going to be there. So you pick a service line of interest. I'll use an example, an orthopedist that I worked with that was looking to start priming the pump for his cash pay knee replacement line. And so he decided that he wanted to do a chronic knee pain product, cash pay, and put it out there in his community. So once he decided to do that, he had to define it. Just like when you go to your mechanic and he has a lube job package, or you go on eBay and you read the description of the people that's going to sell it, you have to decide what you're going to offer and create the workflows to support it so that you can develop, how much is that going to cost. And again, you can dive down into these numbers as deep as you want. Experience teaches that trying to figure out the expense of offering a service line to the last nickel is just another example of perfectionism and paralysis by analysis. So you define it, you come up with just a ballpark of what the expenses are, and don't let the unknowns prevent you from going forward. Again, this is the trial and error system. There's some cost to it, but if you never start it, then nothing will be accomplished. Once you define what you want to offer, then you have to price it. And this is pretty easy, even though conceptually, most of my clients and the people that I talk to find it the most difficult. And that is just sit back and ask yourself, if somebody from the outside came in and asked you to provide this service, how much would you charge them? And that's pretty much how you should price it. So just price it at the amount that you'd be willing to do it. Then take your tactics to the next level. Take the service that you've defined at the price that you've defined it, and then add a value add of some sort. And it's only limited by your imagination. For this guy, he added 1 month of 24/7 access to him so that you can go over how your home exercise program is doing and how you're responding to the treatment that he recommended. In his particular service line, the patient would come in, he would get a history, he would get a set of x-rays, the doctor would come in, examine him, talk about predicted courses, the red flags to look for, etc. Then he would have his in-office physical therapist come in and do a home exercise program and demonstrate it. And then the doctor would come back in, answer any more questions, and escort him out. That was kind of his baseline offering. So then he priced that, and then he added 30 days of 24/7 access to him, and he priced that particular service line higher. Then he took his basic service line and he removed something of value, which is his x-ray, and priced that lower. And the reason that you do this is because when someone is consuming services like this, if they are presented with a spectrum of 3 different options along the lines I just described, they are more likely to convert from lead to client than they would if they were only offered one option. And when they do that, they will pick the middle one about 80% of the time, the top one about 19% of the time, and the bottom one 1% of the time. This is a master tactic that consultants and people who sell intellectual property use all the time to help their conversion rate and also to raise or increase the potential revenue stream without any additional effort really at all. And it is a great tactic that I share with you, and I urge you to use it because it is a powerful tool that you can use for your success. The next thing you got to do is market it. And this is very intimidating. And although you're not paying the 30% to collect your money as you would under a fee for service, this is the one expense that you do have on a cash pay basis, and that is that you got to get the word out there. And some of that marketing can be passive, like the national platform that we talked about, but others can be very targeted to a local market in ways that only you know. I mean, the knee guy that I just talked to, he went to several very physical local employers and put that information out there in their break room, couponed it. He also went to the senior center, although you can do cash pay for certain services in Medicare. There are also those spouses that go to those senior centers that aren't Medicare eligible yet. So he went out there and he marketed it, and he really did quite well. If, however, marketing's not your thing, and I get that, you could just go on a freelancer site like Upworks.com and hire a phenomenal marketer for a targeted engagement for this particular service line. The quality of talent there, if you adjust your search parameters, is extremely high. And all it takes is doing it 2 or 3 times before you'll know everything there is to know about marketing. And 2 to 3 engagements about something like this will cost you about $1,000. And when you compare that against the $50,000 for an MBA, it really is a tremendous deal. And pretty soon you won't be putting any effort into it. The marketing will just feed on itself and become second nature. So don't let the marketing intimidate you. And by all means, don't think it's beneath you either, because you can't help people if they don't know that you're there willing to help. After you market it, then next thing you do is you start adjusting your price. This individual that I talked about found out that he was absolutely flooded with demand almost from day one for this particular knee pain service line. And he approached me about what to do about it. And we had talked about this earlier, and he had discounted what I had to say, so we revisited it. For any of these cash pay service lines, as a clinician, what you want to do is you want to keep your capacity at about 80%. And this is a key issue. Us clinicians, we are socialized to run on the treadmill at full speed. We have such a fear of loss that even a single empty appointment slot makes us feel like we're going to have to write a check. But in a cash pay system, you are looking to get paid based on value and not on your production. And so if you just run the treadmill at 100%, even though it's cash pay, you're going to run into the same problems of burnout, disengagement, and disenchantment that you would in a third-party payment system or an employed system. And you're going to shorten your overall career, and your overall take is going to decline. Another reason that you want to really set a target of 80% as far as capacity is that the margin itself has value. If you run at 80%, you can use that other 20% to adjust your service line, optimize it, create new service lines, and really take advantage of all the fine tuning that a cash pay service line has. And you'll also have the ability to jump on new opportunities immediately because you're not running flat out. In this gentleman's case, he was offered a number of different appointments with residencies to teach cash pay pricing of his services to these residents. I mean, he started teaching what I taught him, and he was able to generate more revenue per unit of effort with that engagement than he ever would have with a one and done knee replacement. And he also diversified his service lines, and he would never have been able to jump on that if he had been running flat out all the time. The most important reason to really set a target of 80% full is that it allows you to maintain your pricing power. If you run a service line at 100% and you start developing a waiting list, you will start muddying the price signals that you are getting from your customers. If people are waiting for 2.5 months for your services, you could surmise that you're undercharging, but by how much? How much of that 2.5 month wait is just that's how long people are willing to wait until they drop off, and how much of it is due to other factors? If you limit yourself to 80% capacity on any of your service lines, you will have a razor sharp signal of whether or not the market is changing and your prices are going too high or too low. If you are not losing 20% of your customers because your prices are too high, your prices are too low. And remember, this is not about earning as much money as you can. This is value-based. You are earning as much money as you can per unit of effort. And if you go 100% flat out, you will lose your ability to hone that, and you'll end up working more and making the same despite your best efforts. Once you're done, do it again and again and again. Keep on repeating the system that I just said, I just described over and over again for different service lines until the proportion of your cash pay patients is where you want it to be. And that's individual for each situation. But remember, this is a trial and error system. Your equity in this is not the money you pay up front to all the quote unquote experts to help you get started. Your sweat equity in this, your equity in this is sweat equity, the opportunity costs and the time figuring out what worked and what didn't work. The idea here is that there's more value overall to be had by using the trial and error approach as opposed to hiring a bunch of people up front who really don't know you or your market close to as well as you do. Failure really is the trail marker on the path to success. And we clinicians, if every one of us was honest, we know that we have made errors and our patients have paid the price. And those have been very, very tightly honed learning experiences for all of us. When you make a mistake doing this, the only person that's suffering is yourself. So embracing mistakes is difficult, but the paradigm that it's only you that's suffering makes it a lot easier. And to be honest, once you get into the system, it's kind of fun. You just have to realize that the failures are not because of the system yourself that I just described. The failures are actually a sign that the system that you created is working. It's identifying, it's giving you feedback. And so as long as you make the adjustments, it's really going to be a powerful tool on your path to success. So this is the website of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. I'm sure many of you are aware of them. They are a cash pay surgery center that offers guarantees, and they also offer financing. They're tremendously forward thinking, and they're doing a tremendous business even now in the COVID world. I put them as an example of an organization that used this system. When they started, they were just knees, hips, and shoulders at the very beginning. And all of these other procedures that are identified by the dots, these aren't serendipitous. They didn't just start doing these because they hired an ENT or got an ENT. Each one of these was developed with the same system of identifying strengths and then creating the service line and then using continual feedback to hone their price points. And their success really speaks for itself. So if it works in surgery center level, it will work for individual clinicians as well. Just apply a systematic approach, embrace failure, and don't get discouraged. Now, the cash pay market's not a panacea. There's a lot of barriers for entry that you're all aware of. Again, there's the regulatory barriers that we just talked about, not just the state regulatory barriers of regulating guarantees and subscription-based services, but also contractual ones based on the contracts that you sign. And you can anticipate going forward, even if you're a small fry, that there's going to be an increasing number of restrictions on the cash pay services that you can charge for the covered patients under these individual contracts. And it's up to you to stay frosty, read them, see if they don't let you line out. And the same thing goes with Medicare. Just because you're accepting Medicare doesn't mean that you're prohibited from charging cash pay for certain services. It does not, as Dr. Arshad knows very well. Simply get your local attorney on the line, talk to them, get what your local conditions are, and then proceed within those limits. But don't think that there's a blanket prohibition on charging cash pay just for Medicare. just learn what your conditions are, and then with your commercial payers, try to change them as much as you can. Marketing is again a barrier, and we have to understand that part of what you are selling when you get a third-party payer to pay you is that you are relieving yourself of the need to make a market. They make a market, point the fire hose at you, and your job is to run on the treadmill and make the most of it. That, of course, leaves you vulnerable to them kicking you out of the market unless you pay them something. But it is helpful to understand that everybody markets. When you are accepting third-party payments, you're just paying someone to market for you. So you have to make a market in some way. You can either pay somebody directly, or you can pay the guy from Upworks who's working for you direct. And I'll leave it to you to decide where you're going to extract the most value from that relationship. The biggest barrier to the cash pay marketplace, however, is sociological and psychological. When I present this information to clinicians who are interested in purchasing my services, their big objection, and I hear it every time, is that, Tom, I'm going to make a market in this service, and then someone's going to see that, they're going to enter it, and they're going to undercut me. Or the local health system is going to undercut me because they have all these financial resources. And so I'm going to have to reduce my price, they'll reduce their price, and pretty soon I'm in a race to the bottom, which is a race that I don't want to win. And my response to that is that you, doctor, are not a commodity. You're just socialized into thinking like you're one. Your employer, your education has really taught you that you're on the assembly line, and when you're done, when you can't do it anymore, it's the next man up, and really you're replaced without anybody missing a beat. That's what you're socialized to do, because that's the industrial model of healthcare delivery that the health systems use, and it also sends you the message that you're replaceable, so it helps keep you from demanding more money. But in reality, what you're selling isn't your place on the assembly line. What you're selling is the ability for your patient to tell themselves a story that you're a skilled professional who's going to put their own personal interests, the patient's interests, ahead of their own. And that is something that is exactly the opposite of a commodity. It's unique. A commodity is a good or service sold into a broad market priced based on supply and demand. Well, there's only one of you, and there's only one of that large relationship. And at the end of the day, that unique relationship allows you to push your prices as high as you want, as high as the market will tolerate. So don't think that just because you're putting yourself out there for cash, you're commoditizing yourself. What you're doing is you're branding yourself and then allowing yourself to be compensated based on the value of your brand. So let's look at some numbers. These are very simplistic, lots of hand waving, and most of you all have already internalized this, but there is some utility just seeing it out there in black and white. You got a practice with $1 million of gross revenue, 60% overhead, that's $400K take home. You get the same practice, 80% third-party payment, but 20% cash. Third-party payment, 60% overhead, that's $320K net. The $200,000 cash is 40% overhead because you're not paying for collections. That's $120K net. You put that together, that's 10% more take home than would otherwise be the case. And if you take it to the extreme example, 40% overhead, 100% cash pay, that's 50% more net revenue. And I realize there's a lot of hand waving here, and there's going to be a lot of changes in the overhead percentage as the payer mix changes, but overall the message is clear. The lower the overhead of the payment system that you sell your labor into, the more of the money that you generate that you can keep. There is one more powerful benefit to the cash pay market that people don't realize but has really been unmasked recently by COVID. And that is the fact that a cash pay market makes you and your practice anti-fragile. Now, what do I mean about that? Well, that is a term that refers to how an organization or individual responds to pressure. If you do worse under pressure, then you are fragile. If you do the same, regardless of the level of pressure, then you're robust or resilient. But if you do better under pressure, you call that anti-fragile. And of course, there's been no more stressor out there lately than COVID. And the reason that the cash pay market makes you anti-fragile under pressure like COVID is because it's not a single payer. It is hundreds and thousands of additional payers. Each patient that pays you is a payer. And that creates a strong structure that allows you to pivot and take advantage of changes in the local market conditions in ways that top-down, large, hidebound organizations simply cannot. And here are some examples. I had clients that started virtual encounters within 36 hours of the lockdown, and they were able to maintain their revenue streams, whereas employed clinicians or other clinicians that were 100% cash pay were still struggling to figure out how to find the back door. These same doctors were also putting out subscription-based COVID seminars so that patients could get information about the outbreak from somebody that they trusted. And they, some like the subscription-based services made this a value add. Some people, however, charged a subscription fee and made a very nice revenue stream out of that. And again, that's something that health systems still haven't connected into. Physician, I know that you, I hope that you have read this in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. There were cash pay concierge doctors on Manhattan that when they were shut down all of a sudden, they started doing home visits on Long Island to people who weren't their patients for $1,000, $3,000, $5,000, and even $10,000 a visit. That will buy you a lot of black market PPE. And a number of them have been interviewed, and I have engaged with a couple of them over LinkedIn, and they say they're never open up their office again. Why would they? They're just doing the home visits that were targeted, in their case, to the people who could pay top dollar for them. But in other cases, some of my lower rent subscription-based clients were doing it for patients who needed them and had their own home PPE so that they would be at decreased risk for getting the COVID. The point is that having a broad cash pay market allowed these doctors to develop these income streams much faster than otherwise, and also provide options for future engagement that the other clinicians don't have. Surgery centers are a great example. I am in contact with a number of surgery centers, want my advice about how to engage their clinician, engage their patients during COVID. That was early on. And there's one surgery center, it's basically a joint factory, and they used COVID now that they couldn't replace joints. They reached out, did support calls and webinars on how to deal with your pain until we can change your, or until we can do your joint. They came in and did, they invited the patients to come to the lawns of their surgery centers and do social distancing exercise programs on a routine basis. Some of them did it for free, one did it for subscriptions, so that these people could get a little socialization, still socially distancing, but still get some physical therapy. Lately, they've gotten the approval to do clinics outside, again, on the front lawn of their surgery center. And the point is that this has not only continued their rapport with their current patients, but because the local hospital systems are struggling to even, get up and running on Zoom, it really has allowed them to engage a whole new population of patients that never even considered them as an option for their joints because they were cash pay. And already they have their waiting list for people to see them once the lockdown is formally lifted is much longer than it was. They are absolutely stealing market share from their competitors, and they love it. And they also feel like they're doing good. So going forward, the cash pay market is not static like any other market. There's going to be some changes. And going forward, here are some things that you have to look for. First of all, there's a lot of shysters out there trying to encourage ignorant clinicians to sign long-term Epic-like contracts for technology. And you have to be very careful about not falling for this. Really, you shouldn't be signing any contracts for any enabling technology that's not cancelable in 30 days without penalty, or that you can't purchase up front. That's very reasonable requests. And if anybody tells you that their mousetrap that they have that you can take care of patients through is better, and therefore, we have to charge you more, don't believe it. Technology is getting cheaper, but the lack of sophistication of most clinicians entering the virtual space is such that you're vulnerable to this, and you can really put yourself behind the 8 ball if you sign a disadvantageous technology contract. There's also market fluctuations, which are very important to understand, and that's why it's so important to run each service line at 80% capacity. The knee guy that I talked about previously, he wanted to devote 10 slots a week for this particular service line, the knee service line, and I managed to talk him down to 8 out of 10, and he was very happy with that in the end, because when things started going south, people started canceling their appointment, and he was able to cut his prices and still serve them and still generate some revenues in a way he never would have if he had let that go long. And he was able to push his prices up earlier to a high enough point that he took the 9th slot every week and put somebody on scholarship and treated them for free. So he felt that he was fulfilling his professional responsibility. So going forward, people are not going to have a lot of money, and you need to be sensitive to those market fluctuations, so you can alter your offerings as soon as possible. But the biggest cash pay challenges comes from, you guessed it, the regulators, especially our federal government. Over the past 7 weeks, our federal government has given the health systems in this country $175 billion. That's with a B, essentially with no strings attached. Our federal government has picked a winner, and it is not us. And the paradigm that you need to look at in order to understand what is going to happen is what happened to the banking system in 2008. The federal government bailed out the banks, became part owner of the banks, guaranteed their existence, too big to fail, and then changed the regulatory regime to reflect that. As a result, the banks started buying up the regional and smaller banks until there were about a quarter of the banks in existence in 2014 as they were in 2008. In fact, the business plan for your bank now is to open a bank, develop a footprint, and then sell it into the consolidating market. That's what the banking business has become, and that's what the healthcare delivery system is going to become. The strong are going to acquire the weak, and anybody that competes outside this healthcare system will be seen as an enemy to either be acquired or coerced. Fully expect, and I will go on the record for this, our professional organizations, which are fully bought and paid for by the health systems, are going to start coming out with how unethical it is to take cash pay healthcare. And they'll come up with some phony justification for it that won't pass freshman logic. But they will come up with it because that's what they're paid to do. And you will see this pushback on a licensure issue. There's going to be a push to restrict licenses, especially in more regulatory heavy states, to restrict how much revenue you can generate from cash pay. It is coming because the government and the health systems are working together for their mutual interest. And in the end, that is going to result in a universal coverage of some sort where the patient pays 20% of their first dollar costs. And this is very important to understand because if you get everybody covered under such a system, then those of us who do cash pay can't compete because the individuals will be paying, their first dollar will be 20% of what we can reasonably charge. And that is an intentional design of the system. That's why you never saw universal catastrophic care, because the health systems don't want to compete against cash pay, against people who can do things more efficiently. If the patient had to pay the first $5,000 out of their pocket, they will get more value from smaller, nimble organizations than from large health systems. That's just the way of the world. So the universal coverage that's coming is going to be first dollar with 20% from the patient, 80% from the government, something along those lines. Okay? And that is a swipe at those of us who are trying to work outside of the system. The good news there is that the people who are developing this particular healthcare system don't want to get their care within it. They want to They want to retain their privileges of position and wealth. And so in the end, face-to-face, one-on-one, cash pay healthcare is going to evolve into a luxury good. And this is why everything that we've talked about today has to be put in the context of short and medium term play for your own personal business plan, because the long term you're going to be competing against this first dollar coverage. And the big benefit of doing what we talked about today is that you'll develop a comfort, an expertise, and a skill in selling your labor for cash, so that when universal coverage comes, and really the only argument against it is how much it costs, and since we're printing money to beat the band now, that argument's gone out the window. When universal coverage does come, you will be able to pivot fully and take advantage of the market for healthcare as a luxury good. You'll do it at 80% capacity, and then you can donate 10% of your personal capacity to charity, to people who have challenges that are not covered under universal coverage and can't pay. And then that final 10% will go back to you and your own personal well-being. So you can be a doctor and serve people and live a fulfilled life as long as you want. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Well, I'm going to say that there definitely are, and you certainly did a great job of really making it quite succinct, the whole reality of what's happening, where we're at, and kind of where it's definitely going to go, sadly. But as you also show opportunistically, there's a lot that's out there too, so it's going to be kind of set the wheat from the chaff, as it were, between who are the good docs and who are the bad doctors. And I don't mean in terms of their skill sets, but in terms of, who understands that being a doctor is actually a business. Because if you're smart, you're not going to consider it either that you're a slave or that it's a right of somebody else's to your abilities and service, that it is a business like any other. And I should be competing, and I want to get paid my fair share, and, and on my terms, kind of a thing. So that's great. But before, I had a separate comment, but even before, it was kind of good that you kind of zipped by, and I don't know if everybody noticed it, but it was extremely important, really, in terms of being successful in this new world. When you talked about having three choices for the patient to pick from, because really, if you have like one choice, they can't make a choice off, and that's not enough. And if there's too many choices, they can't move either. And I learned it in a backwards way, because when I was a young kid, right out of college, I owned a restaurant on Ohio State campus, and we had the guy from the soda company come to set up our pop service. And we had small, medium, and large. And we had like all these medium cups. He was bringing in cases of these medium cups. And we're like, well, what's the story? He goes, oh, you're all going to sell only mediums. I'm like, well, then what are we even bothering with these other two sizes? He goes, no. The small and the large is what sells the medium.
Right.
And so that was rather comical. So that's why it's important that these need to be this way. So for me, what's kind of nice about what we were talking about, one, there's business signaling when they have to adjust their prices, because now we're going to figure out what is a doctor visit really supposed to cost, or whatever's supposed to some made up number. And then the other idea, by being at that 80%, what that really is going to do, because there's plenty of doctors that have entrepreneurship. I mean, look at Dr. Jawad Arshad as an example, but lo and behold, if they're running 100%, they can't be entrepreneurial. They're done. But if they're at 80%, now we'll get to see which of those doctors actually are like well beyond the scope of just trying to be a doctor, and we can unleash the power of the whole market like it's never been done before. So let's get some hands up. But before we take any questions, let me just get a little feedback from Dr. Arshad, just because we've been kind of talking around you here a little bit. What's been your take on what Tom had to say here?
No, thanks so much, Jeff, and Tom, great job. I know that people have a lot of questions, and it's precisely for these reasons, right, why we set out to set up this marketplace. And our goal, for example, at WOW, is not to build a network of providers or even build a network of consumers. We just know that there are really great physicians out there, right? I think Paula Mudo is on here, right? So there are great physicians out there that are currently serving the cash pay market, and then there are consumers, right, close to, I think, Tom, you said, how many billions that are currently being spent, in the cash pay market, right? But there is no standard method for that consumer to connect with the provider, right? And we can kind of go along and, build one for primary care physicians and then another system for cardiologists and someone else for labs and so on. But this is precisely the reason that I think it's holding the consumer back from really jumping in. So if we can really build a system that sort of addresses the 360 of the care model, where I can go in and make an appointment with my physician and get that imaging study when and if needed, and obtain my medication on cash-based pricing, and also engage my employer perhaps, right? Or also be able to purchase, Charlie mentioned, for example, an alternative coverage plan for major medical expenses, like the one Health Excellence Plus brings to the app, right? Now we are going to start to drive the consumer because it's simpler, it's easier, right? It's not that Amazon sells things cheaper, they don't. It's just that if you have the Amazon app and if you do the one click, it's just simpler, right? I mean, that's the reason. It's not because they necessarily have something better.
And the biggest barrier, and I know that you've experienced this, but share this with the people that are there, for working with a platform like WOW and getting clinicians to post their prices on it, even though there's no barriers. I mean, it's free, it's facile, there's no restrictions, no contracts. I mean, it is obviously designed by a doctor for a doctor. Despite the fact that it's literally just stepping a little bit up on a curve to do it, it is very challenging to get the physicians out there to understand that we're Fukushima, we're after the earthquake, but before the tsunami, that the world has changed, and those who move first will do best. And I think once the visual aspect of the wreckage, once their local health system gets acquired by Mayo or something, then that's going to wake people up. But for now, that's what the emphasis is on, is that it is a new world, and you gotta jump if you want to maintain your autonomy.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tom. You're right on. I mean, we can go on, but I don't know if Jeff, you want to give any participants any questions. I think there were some that were being asked that Tom could address.
Jeff, I think you might be mute. Unmute yourself.
Well, here I am. Am I there now?
Yeah.
Wait, Jeff actually muted himself?
Somehow by accident I did. Unbelievable. Who allowed that to happen? I was going to say, Dr. Muto, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. It was terrific, and it speaks to what we've been thinking for the last few years, which was the pre-COVID world, the pre-tsunami world. We recognized the foundations weren't solid, and that we needed to simply become more transparent. I think that's what we're all talking about. But the post-COVID world, you have to think about who's buying healthcare. Who buys healthcare now? The employers and the government, right? The employers buy the insurance and the government plans, and the payers are kind of a third party. The cash pay people are just a small portion, although they're not a small portion. As Dr. Jawad said, there's like 41, there were 46 million people paying cash for care back like 5 years ago. There's double that now. Post-COVID now, there are fewer employers. There are going to be, it's not just that people are out of work. The big companies like the Neiman Marcuses are going to disappear for a while. So it's not just the employees that are going to be gone, the employers. So who's going to be buying healthcare? That's what you really be asked. And we talk about two-tier systems, government plan and a second tier. I argue we have a three-tier system. We have employer-based health insurance, we have government, and we have personal pay. We direct to consumer pay. And this direct to consumer market, which is in front of our eyes for the past decade, is going to absolutely accelerate in the next few years. And there's going to be an interesting thing on the doctor side, because think about our waiting rooms. Our waiting rooms overnight have changed. We make our balance that 80%. I love that 80%, because we go at 120%, because we book 30 patients because 20 show up and we get paid for 10, right?
That's exactly right.
We do things, right? So that's why we do 120%. But think about it. You can't do that now. Your waiting room cannot be overbooked. So you must create a couple of seats in that waiting room that are cash pay. Even if you don't want to go full in to a cash pay world, to survive, you must have a couple of seats aside and see what the market is going to bear, because patients are not going to want to wait, and they're going to be much happier paying you than they are going to be to pay an insurer. And if they expand the health savings accounts, if price transparency finally makes it into CARES 4, which we're hoping, it'll give a little nod toward this growing group of patients who are going to be unemployed, but might become self-employed. They may not find an employer to pay their health insurance costs. And that's going to be a bulk of the small business taxpayers in this country. And so I do believe the government's going to step in with something. I don't think they have the money to make it a high-end product. The hospitals behaved so crazy during this COVID crisis. They have their hands out, but they're not organized. Every doctor will tell you these hospitals have not used their resources to the best that they can use them. So it's going to take them a long time to recover from that. And if you think of your Greek history, it's the Battle of Salamis. You have the giant Persian ships, which are going to, yes, they're bigger than us, they're better than us, there's more of them, but they will not maneuver where we're headed, because you have to have the small mobile fleet. Because what's happening just on the science side of things, care is in those surgery centers. Those outpatient knee replacements are a reality. If they weren't a reality pre-COVID, they're going to become a reality post-COVID. And so a lot of the smaller, more flexible, more nimble people are going to potentially be better. And I just know that in our platform with UberDoc now, we have a wonderful telemedicine component. We don't charge our doctors for marketing. Marketing is a scary thing. We can help you dip your toe into that world. We have telemedicine capability. We have not set that price point, Tom. We set it at $300 and we want to see what it is. We say live and in person with a specialist should be the same, because in fact, it is still doctor-patient medicine. We what that price point will bear, but we do believe that that the doctors need to be at the forefront of this technology revolution. We should not be behind the time. We should be in front of it, because you're right. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of what we did during electronic records and so forth. But I'm actually really hopeful. I think post-COVID is a wild. It's anyone's game coming up.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, it isn't anyone's game. Actually, it's our game. Because,
it's our game.
Because the profit lines for the health systems and the large providers are foot traffic into their commercial real estate and extracting data. And you and I are all about taking care of the patient. They're not really interested in that, because it's not much of a margin, only for a few big procedures. So they're going to have to deal with their own structural shortcomings. And for clinicians, the big risk about dipping your toe into cash pay is that it's like Lay's potato chips. Once you get a taste, you can't eat just one. And before you know it, you're going to be 100% cash pay, and there's no going back.
There's a great thing about that, Tom and Paul, is that the larger where you're at today, and because, this COVID is like forcing everyone to say, geez, I better do something maybe. They don't have to do anything major here. Like you've been kind of saying periodically, they can just fill a couple slots, just get a taste of what this is like. Because just like you said, once they get a flavor, I was at a bunch of AAPS events like earlier on before all this technology and everything. And the couple doctors that did, everyone cheered them immensely. But the minute you'd ask any of them, are they going to do it? They go, oh no, I can never give up my insurance practice, because there was no mechanism like what we're seeing now, where you could just literally tip your toe in the water. Like you said, just do something. Colleen, we got a couple slots left for some questions. So what have you got here for Dr. Davis?
Well, thanks for a great presentation. There's just so much to cover, and I know that we've gone over, but I think the one thing that my takeaway during this time, and when we talk about opportunity, is that, whether you're a physician a little bit nervous about giving up that insurance market, or you're the broker who's not entirely sure how this will pan out, and you might want to, go slowly, I think that is the greatest risk that we face. I don't see where there is a risk when we decide to think for ourselves and spend our own money where we choose. But if we fail to appropriately and aggressively educate the physicians and the buyers of healthcare, however they come to you, about their choice and their options, then these options will be removed from us. Because while the hospital systems, the large payers, they are a very administrative, slow, sloth-like decision maker. They're not nimble and quick, as in the reference of the fleet. And I think that if these smaller employers and the physicians understand that they can get started without having to make an entire shift, sell their house and live in a box in order to hope for these patients, they really are out there. And it is like the Lay's potato chip. They will enjoy it. When they enjoy their job more, the patients will enjoy the care more, and it becomes less about the price and about the value and the experience. And that is what we need to return this to. But if we fail to talk about this and get these people doing it now, sure enough, there will be choices made for us. So I think it's really, really important to really evaluate what you really think risk is. And sometimes not taking action is the most dangerous decision.
And we have nothing to lose.
And there's an awful lot of, right. You really don't have anything to lose. You do need to check with your states. Dr. Philip Eskew also with DPC Frontier generally keeps a pretty tight handle on what's happening in each person's state from a legislative perspective. But so far, we still have the right to choose for the most part. And I think it's important to get out there and educate our public. And I think on the broker side, one of the things that I cross paths with often is this conversation doesn't generally come up until the employer is really crying pain on the healthcare purchase. This is not simply a decision for people who can't afford the current model. This is just a good decision. And it's a paradigm shift for the brokers and agents out there. So this isn't the solution to come in and save the game when they can't afford what they're currently doing, but it's a great thing to bring to the table just because it's the right thing to do. And I really, really encourage everyone to start to understand the opportunity that's there before they're, at that point with a client.
That's really very good. And truthfully, it is about getting out there first, because if you're going to tip the dominoes, we got to get that key amount of doctors, those key amount of brokers doing the right stuff, and boom, it'll start to go. Because otherwise, just like you said, we're going to get stuck with a one-size-fit-all mentality. It's not going to be good. We got time for one last question and a quick response. So Arvind, you've been waiting patiently.
Thanks, Jeff. I will be quick. So, Tom, it was a perfectly timed talk, and Charles and Jeff, appreciate you bringing him on. And so I just wanted to, I think Paula and Colleen said most of the things that I wanted to say. So I'm just going to say that what we have done in our practice, we have a two-physician endocrinology diabetes practice. And just like Tom said, within a weekend since the shutdown was announced, we were able to convert about 80 to 90% of our visits into televisits. And so we really didn't have much of a problem doing that, primarily because our patients trusted that we're going to provide the same level of care. So I think for those of us who are established in that manner in the community, using this opportunity provided by COVID is absolutely necessary. And one of the things that I have tried to do, and maybe others can try, is collect your data about how the change in your processes has not affected the quality of your care during the COVID, especially on the outpatient basis. So that's what I'm doing. I've set up a short survey for our patients to take, and asking them if the change over to virtual has been cost effective, time effective, and quality effective. So if we can prove that, and then we have enough data, I think there will be a lot more buyers. Basically we have covered the three aspects of access, quality, and cost. So I think this is a good group to get moving on that direction. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Dr. Davis, would you like to kind of make a final comment there?
I will. I want to circle around to, again, the important point that the world has changed. And after the tsunami recedes in the next 18 to 36 months, there's really going to be two types of people selling healthcare. There's going to be wage slaves on a treadmill and clinicians who are taking care of their patients and being compensated based on the value they generate. And the only question that clinicians today have to answer, although they do have to answer it right now, is which of those are you going to be? Thank you.
Oh,
It's
very
been a
good.
privilege.
Oh, that was great. And thanks so much for today. That was a very, very rewarding talk, I have to say.